$60. $60 is how much most AAA new release games cost, and companies are trying to increase that number all the time. Still, $60 is a lot of money, and what you get for that money is important. This includes things such as whether the game is a physical or digital version. Now, there are numerous ways to purchase games, such as an online eShop, Amazon delivery, GameStop, and other gaming stores. I have done all of these and probably more throughout my years of purchasing video games. But I've noticed recently deciding to purchase games physically or digitally has become a lot more of a difficult decision. I think the reason why is because buying games digitally has become a lot more compelling recently, and physical releases have changed drastically due to the changes in things such as game file sizes, as games have continued to grow bigger and be more detailed visually and conceptually, which I guess this makes it a pretty good time to do an old-fashioned
pros and cons list, yay!
to determine the advantages and disadvantages of digital and physical versions. So let's start with buying games digitally. So one big pro of buying games digitally is you can play it on release. When you order a game digitally, you can pre-download it in most cases and play it as soon as the game releases during midnight, which is a big feature that is a big feature of buying games digitally. That is a huge positive. I mean, the alternative for physical games is that you have to go wait in line at midnight and, you know, still have to go home. And with how games are, you know, recently, you'll probably have like a 2 million gigabyte update, you know, before you can even try to play the game. So either way, you're going to be waiting a while, and if you want to play a game as soon as you can, I mean, getting it digitally just makes sense. It makes the most sense. You can switch between games easily because, you know, changing discs or cartridges is, you know, very taxing on the gamer body, if I do say so myself. Oh, why? Why? Oh, why? Oh, God, this is so long. Why? Link, don't cry. If you're someone who typically loses things, I mean, losing something such as a Nintendo cartridge, these small little things, is a pretty big deal. And, you know, $60 going down the drain just because you can't find where your game is sucks a lot. So on to the cons. Running out of storage is a big con, and especially for things like Switches. I keep using the Switch as an example because it's right next to me. It's easy. For Switches, you know, they have the SD cards in the very bottom. So you can easily run out of storage if you don't have a big enough version of that, which also costs money. And, you know, going on with the losing stuff example, if you lose your games, if you're worried about losing your games, if you have 5 like 16 gigabyte SD cards and you don't know which games are which are on them, is also a pretty big con for buying games digitally. Waiting for it to download is also a pretty giant con if you don't pre-release or pre-order the game and can download it before it even releases, as, you know, just kind of sucks waiting around if, you know, you want to play it right this second. But, I mean, I guess maybe it doesn't if you're into that kind of thing. I love a good loading screen. Another huge con, at least for me, is that you don't really own your games, and you could say maybe the same thing about physical games in some, you know, tenses, but for the most part, you don't own the games you have digitally, and once those like digital places that you originally got the game from, a lot of times you can't get those anymore. For example, the Wii just recently shut down their online store, and therefore any game you bought on the Wii online, you can't really download anymore. So that's a pretty big con, that once those places are gone, it's really almost impossible to re-download certain games if you don't already have it on the system. There's also rare cases where if the game is removed from an online store, you can be revoked access from a game, whereas, you know, if you have a physical version of the game, it's a lot harder for somebody to revoke access. They'd have to break into your house, I guess, which, yeah.
We have come for your copy of Stitch Gem.
So now we've come to the bonus tip. Bonus tip. For PC games, it usually just makes sense to buy games digitally, I think. It's really hard to get physical versions of computer games, I feel like, especially as years have gone by. Like, I have a physical PC version of Skyrim somewhere. Not here, I don't think, but I have it somewhere around here. But yeah, it's really hard to get a digital or physical version of computer games. And the reason why it makes sense is because it doesn't have a life cycle like a console does. Buying games digitally for computers, as computers change and upgrade, and with platforms like Steam around, there's not really an exact point where it'll be cut off and no longer be accessible. So you really have your online collection for a really long time, as it seems right now. Alright, so let's move on to the physical games. Woo! Physical games. Alright. So one thing that is a pretty big pro is if you like collecting stuff. I mean, collecting video games just kind of makes sense, you know. If you're passionate into it as like a hobby, you know, it just kind of makes sense. You have like games that are your favorite, you really enjoy, you really love, you know. It's just like same with like movies, music, all that kind of things. It's nice to have a collection in some cases. I guess the only opposite con to that would be, you know, clutter. Like if you have a bunch of games that you hardly played, they just sit around, you know, and they just, you know, take up space. Another pro that was previously kind of mentioned is basically you have the game for as long as you have it, you know. You will always have access to that game as long as you have, you know, a working console. Now, I'd also argue that you get more for your money, because in a lot of cases right now, buying games digitally and physically is basically the same price, at least if we're referring to AAA games. There's some instances where indie games, I feel like, will go out digitally and then have special physical versions. That's happened with, you know, I think Binding of Isaac had a similar thing going on with that. But for a lot of AAA games, I mean, you'll get like a manual or sometimes like a cool map. In the instance of like Red Dead Redemption 2, you get to keep that forever, you know, and always, you know, hold on to that, which is pretty cool. Whereas the digital version, you don't get anything. For saving money, it's kind of a bit of a mixed bag. Going to a game store like GameStop, you can get a lot of physical games pre-owned, pre-used, just used games, and get a pretty good bargain on a lot of them. The equivalent to this, I guess, would be like Steam sales for digital games. So it's not exactly a clear victory in terms of, you know, what's cheaper, I guess you could say. But you can find a lot of really good pre-owned games on, you know, just sitting around at game stores. I think an underrated pro of physical games is sharing games. I just recently let my brother use the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and that saved him $60, you know, $60 on a game he wasn't sure if he'd even be into. Maybe down the line he'll buy it, you know, but he could at least buy it for cheap, knowing, you know, he's already played through that game. And letting somebody else use your physical game version, if it's just sitting there for a while, like, it helps somebody out, you know. Saving money is awesome. It can also save some space on your storage of your console. So in a lot of games, they'll have maybe like a portion of it that is on the disc or cartridge. Usually, you know, if you're lucky, it'll have all of it. As we're going more and more into the future, it seems there's less of that and multiple discs in like games like Red Dead Redemption 2. So it's kind of going away in some aspects. But one big one that I can think of right off the top of my head is Spyro Reignited Trilogy. I was looking up, I want to get that on a physical edition of that game because that was part of my childhood. But the first game came on the disc, which totally sucks. It's not even that huge of a game compared to like some of the other games I've mentioned. But yeah, that only comes with the first game, which really sucks since it's a trilogy. So I just ended up getting that digitally because, you know, just kind of made sense. So moving on to some of the cons, I've listed maybe, you know, some of them already, just going through the whole lists, but just make it a little bit more clear. I mentioned clutter. Clutter is a pretty big, you know, it can be a con if you don't like collecting things. It's prone to damage. It's probably one of the biggest one of the biggest problems with physical games is if it gets damaged, you lose that access to the game, and you can only hope that you pay more money to get it fixed. The equivalent, I guess, for digital games is if your console messes up. And another con is it takes longer to obtain by, you know, having to go to a physical place unless you get it ordered. But even then, it takes, you know, a few days usually for delivery. So in most cases, you know, it's going to take some sort of time. Whereas buying a game digitally, it takes a little bit to download, sure, but not as long as usually going somewhere and getting it. So what do I prefer in terms of going all over this? I'd say per game it definitely varies, but overall I do enjoy buying and collecting physical games. Because having them farther into the future is something that's important to me. I like to go back and like play some older games that I remember from my childhood or years ago that I really loved, and you know, seeing how my memories of that game has changed to now, that's pretty important for me. But honestly, it really does change per game. And if I'm really excited for a game, you know, maybe I'll get it physically, or, you know, if I need to play it, if I feel like I need to play it on the release, you know, digitally. There's also, you know, I do a mix of both where I'll get it digitally and then later down the line I'll plan to get it physically or get it physically. One game I've done that with is Mario Odyssey. I don't have a physical copy yet, but I got it digitally to play on release, and I'm planning to get that sometime in the future when it, you know, if it ever drops in price. Like, geez, it's still like $60, I'm pretty sure right now. It's a couple years old. Not most Nintendo games get like that, but not all games. There's some games that come out and like within a few months it's already dropped, you know, $10. My preferred way of purchasing games is probably through Amazon, just because, for example, if you get a game that is being released, you can pre-order it, and usually it'll come like the next day, which is pretty great. And if you have Amazon Prime shipping, I mean, you don't have to worry about getting it upselled, you know, random things at a game store, you know, get random membership, all that sort of stuff that you don't really need. So to wrap all of this up, I think it just overall truly depends on how a game's physical release is compared to its digital, and how much that game means to you in the long term. If it's a series you really love, you might want it physical because you like, you know, seeing that game, be able to play it anytime you want into the foreseeable future, having other people, you know, be able to play that game, lending them copies, all that sort of thing. If you like to play games now, or you like just having it on your console, not having to worry about bringing games everywhere if you're hanging out with friends, obviously, you know, it really depends on your situation. But with all this in mind, I think you could probably carve out what you think is best for your situation. And even though I might, you know, tip more on the side of physical games, I can see also why certain people would prefer digital games for their needs. So yeah, it's kind of a different video, but I hope you enjoyed it. I'm gonna try to put some good effort in this video. Hopefully you like everything, and we'll see what video I'll do next. Thank you for watching.